it's caused appalling disasters.
You'd see this big arc of lightning, and you'd watch that baby come right down the side of the aircraft.
You knew that it was a terrible tragedy because the airplane was in the river.
Extreme weather. It's responsible for a staggering 1 in 3 air crashes. But each terrible tragedy teaches us something new.
Larry, we're going down! Larry! I know it! I know it!
The airline industry is constantly developing new technology to fight the problem. But when the weather gets bad, accidents still happen. Will we ever win the battle against extreme weather? Dusk, Washington, D.C. Air Florida Flight 90 waits at Washington National Airport. It's bound for Fort Lauderdale in Florida, but the weather is appalling. The airport is blanketed in up to 10 centimeters of snow, and the temperature drops to -4. It's a time when pilots need to be particularly attentive to the hazards of snow and ice.
It was snowing, it was freezing cold.
David Learmount is a pilot and aviation journalist.
Every time winter comes round, all the good airlines remind their pilots they must be aware of all the risks that winter throws at them.
Snow clearing equipment is used to clear runways. Aircraft are de-iced using a mixture of hot water and glycol. On board Flight 90, the 79 passengers and crew have been delayed for over an hour and a half by the snow and are impatient to get off. One of them is Joe Stiley. He's told his wife he'll only be away 24 hours and will then take the children on holiday. At 3:59 p.m., the Air Florida flight is given permission to take off. Flight 90 gathers speed down the runway. But as it climbs out of the airport, it suddenly goes into a stall.
Stalling! Larry, we're going down! Larry! I know it! I know it!
The aircraft has plunged into the icy waters of the Potomac River. Within seconds, only the tail is visible. Then, against all the odds, a small group of survivors bob to the surface. Ice prevents rescuers reaching the struggling figures. Then, a helicopter arrives. It's a race against time. In freezing water, a human will lose consciousness within 15 minutes. But only one person can be rescued at a time. The first to be winched to safety is business executive Bert Hamilton. He's followed by Kelly Duncan, a 22-year-old air stewardess. Miraculously, she's only suffering from minor injuries. Eventually, a rope is thrown to a third survivor. Joe Stiley has been badly injured and is desperately trying to stay afloat.
I was holding on to a piece of the tail section. I held on the rope and let him drag me out.
To save time, Joe grabs another survivor. Priscilla Tirado has lost her husband and child and is in extreme distress.
I tried to get the rope that they gave to us on her.
But he hasn't got the strength to hold on, and she's left floundering in the icy water. Time is running out. Then a bystander strips off and jumps in. Lenny Skutnik, in an act of extraordinary courage, pulls her to the shore. In all, 5 survivors are rescued from the water. A 6th man, Arland Williams, who has repeatedly passed the rescue line to others, doesn't make it.
There was a 6th man clinging to the wreckage, and as I dropped the flotation devices, he handed these devices to the other people who were clinging around him on the wreckage.
A span of the 14th Street Bridge will later be named after him. But getting people out of the river is only part of the problem. On the 14th Street Bridge itself that day, there's also chaos. One of the aircraft's wings has clipped it, overturning and crushing vehicles.
All of a sudden, that thing shattered. And then I looked around, and the cars over here were smashed, and I said, oh, God.
Rescuers fight to pull people out of crushed cars. Bill Hendricks will later lead the crash investigation.
There were 6 cars just flattened out. Part of the bridge structure was gone, the bridge railing was gone. It was a terrible sight, and the airplane was in the river with still with victims inside it.
The accident's final death toll is 74 passengers and 4 people on the bridge. But the big question hanging over the whole incident is what has gone wrong. Washington that day has been hit by freezing temperatures and unusually heavy snow. But dozens of other aircraft have landed and taken off safely in identical conditions. So what makes Flight 90 the only victim of snow that evening? In the days after the accident, divers and cranes are brought to the crash site on the Potomac River. The first task for the chief crash investigator, Bill Hendricks, is to locate and retrieve the flight data recorders. It's a difficult job.
The visibility underneath that water, as reported by the divers, was, maybe 1 foot. So it was murky and very difficult for those boxes to be recovered.
Instead, divers rely on the fact that the recorders are designed to emit a bleep when they're immersed in water. Yet when they're first hauled out in a section of wreckage, they fall out and slip back into the water. It will eventually take 7 days to get both the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder ashore. It's a moment of triumph for the divers.
Yesterday I was a little bit disappointed when we lost that one lift on the midsection, but morale definitely got a shot in the arm today.
Now at last, Hendricks can piece together what's happened.
Once we got the flight recorders, it came together quite clearly what the cause of that accident was.
The first clue is something that happens 50 minutes before takeoff. Snow has made the taxiway slippery, and the tow tugs can't pull Flight 90 back from the boarding gate. The pilot, Larry Wheaton, decides to help.
Okay, I'm gonna try a little reverse thrust.
He revs the aircraft's engines and then reverses the thrust for 90 seconds. It's like putting a car into reverse. He hopes the engines will force the aircraft back from the gate, but it's a highly irregular maneuver. The reversed thrust kicks up snow and ice that is sucked into the engines.
It throws stuff in front of the engine which then gets sucked into it. It's really something that you avoid. It can gunge up a number of the sensors which are essential for the aircraft's correct performance.
It's a bad judgment, but it should not have caused a crash. Modern aircraft engines are equipped to deal with snow and ice. But then, Bill Hendricks finds something else. It happens during the pre-takeoff check.
Air conditioning pressurization. Set. Engine on the ice. Off.
The crew has failed to turn on the engine's de-icing system. This is a system for heating the front edge of the engine intake, warming the incoming air. With the system switched off, any snow and ice drawn into the engine by the reverse thrust will freeze, interfering with the engine's performance.
That was, I wouldn't say a shock, but it was a revelation that there was inexperience in the winter operations of this flight crew not to turn that engine anti-ice on.
As Flight 90 now lumbers down the runway, the co-pilot, Roger Pettit, voices concern. The engines don't seem to be developing enough thrust.
God, look at that thing. That don't seem right.
But Wheaton brushes his concerns aside.
Yes, it is. No, I don't think that's right. Maybe it is.
It takes the plane an extra 15 seconds and 600 meters more runway than usual to lift off. Finally, it climbs into the air. But almost immediately, it goes into a stall.
Stalling! Stalling! We're falling!
The warning kicks in.
Pull up! Pull up!
But there's nothing the pilots can do.
Larry, we're going down! Larry! I know it! I know it!
Piecing the evidence together, investigators can now establish how a combination of human error and extreme weather caused Flight 90 to crash. First, as snow builds up on the taxiway, Wheaton uses reverse thrust to help push back from the gate.
Engine on the ice.
Second, with the engine anti-ice turned off, freezing snow and ice are drawn into the engine. This interferes with the engine's performance. As a result, when Flight 90 takes off, the engines are only producing a thrust or engine pressure ratio of 1.70. A Boeing 737 needs a thrust ratio of at least 2.04 to take off safely. The final investigation finds the pilot, Larry Wheaton, guilty of a catalogue of errors.
These pilots were not acting as if they knew much about winter-type operations, and as a result of their breaking just about every rule in the book regarding icing, in their pre-takeoff regime, the aircraft crashed.
The accident drives home the fact that when the weather gets bad, there is no margin for error.
Are you declaring an emergency, sir?
Watch all episodes of Ice Pilots. Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required. Download Veely now.
It's a problem engineers have been battling with for years. The modern fight against extreme weather goes back to the 1970s. Christmas Eve, 1971. Lancer Flight 508 is bound for the remote Peruvian town of Pachalpa. On board are 17-year-old Juliana Kopka and her mother Maria. Her father runs a wildlife research station in the jungle, and the family plan to spend the Christmas holidays together.
I was very excited and looking forward to seeing my father. I hadn't seen him for a long time. The research station was also like a second home to me, and I was really thrilled to be spending a couple of months there.
It's a busy flight. Many other people are joining family and friends for the holidays. The first 30 minutes of the journey are uneventful. But then, the plane runs into a tropical thunderstorm.
Thunderbolts were flashing around us, and the plane was being thrown up and down. People were very nervous, even terrified.
Then suddenly, the plane is hit by a huge bolt of lightning. Everything is thrown around.
It goes through my mind like a film. Everything went very fast.
The pilots fight to keep control. But the plane is breaking up.
Suddenly, it turned very quiet. I could only hear the sound of the wind in my ears.
Juliana falls more than 3 kilometers. Yet miraculously, she survives, still strapped into her seat. The seat may have been her salvation.
I ought to have injured myself very badly when I hit the treetops. But the airline seat was below me, and I can only imagine it cushioned the landing.
Juliana is alive, but she has a broken collarbone, a badly swollen right eye, large gashes on her arms and legs, and concussion. Her first thought is for her mother, but she's nowhere to be seen. Juliana is on her own. But she has one vital piece of knowledge.
My father used to tell me, when you get lost, you should try and find a stream or running water. He said, follow that stream and you will find a bigger stream, and that will turn into a river. And then you'll find people living nearby.
As news of the accident reaches the outside world, rescue planes are sent to search for survivors.
I could hear the plane searching above me. I knew the rescue operation had started. But I wasn't able to do anything as the jungle was dense and I couldn't communicate with them.
As she sets off to look for help, her only food is a handful of sweets she's found at the crash site.
I lived on them for 3 days and just drank water. There were piranhas in the river. Stingrays were an even greater danger, and electric eels. I could see caimans everywhere.
As the days and nights go by, she becomes increasingly exhausted and disorientated.
With each day, I lost more hope. I had moments when I was desperate, especially during the nights. The nights were horrible.
Deep cuts on her arm begin to worry her.
I felt there is something in my arm. It kind of hurt. Something was moving in there. I couldn't see it properly, but when I twisted my arm, I saw that little white heads were looking out.
The wound has become infested with flesh-eating maggots. Finally, after 11 days, famished and exhausted, she stumbles on a logging camp. It's her salvation. Today, 40 years later, Juliana Kopke is Dr. Juliana Diller and works as a librarian at the Munich Zoological Center in Germany. She's the only survivor of Lancer Flight 508. Her mother, along with 90 other passengers and the crew, have died. Memories of the accident are always with her.
Mostly, it's an atmosphere, a sound, a smell, sometimes even a color. And I'm taken back to the situation then. It's very strange, but I think this is how it will always be.
When aircraft investigators later examine the accident, they find a chain of events leading up to the disaster. 40 minutes into the journey, Lancer Flight 508 runs into a thunderstorm. Lightning hits the aircraft's right wing. Vapor from a fuel tank ignites. Fire spreads, and the wing is torn from the fuselage. The Lockheed Electra falls out of the sky. It's one of several accidents during the 1970s and 80s that are attributed to lightning and marks the beginning of an attempt to find solutions to the hazards of lightning strikes. One of the centers of research into the dangers of flying is NASA. At its research center in Langley, Virginia, it drop tests helicopters, crashes passenger cabins, and develops new forms of cockpit instrumentation, all in the name of improving aircraft design. But during the 1980s, one of the most important topics of research is lightning. The work is particularly urgent because from the 1980s onwards, increasing numbers of aircraft are built using carbon fiber components in the fuselage. It's lighter, but more easily damaged by lightning than a conventional metal fuselage. Modern planes also depend on sophisticated electrical instruments that are damaged by the electromagnetic field of a lightning storm. Bruce Fisher is director and chief engineer at NASA Langley. In the 1980s, he was a flight engineer in the Storm Hazard Research Team.
NASA's Storm Hazards Research, getting struck by lightning now to enhance flight safety in the future.
He was part of a team that flew a specially adapted F-106 military aircraft into hundreds of lightning storms. The experience was dramatic.
It's a very turbulent environment. Lots of updrafts, lots of downdrafts, The wing drops left, the wing drops right. Even though you're strapped into your ejection seat and you're wearing a helmet, you're still dancing around inside the cockpit of the airplane.
We're now at 30,500 feet.
When they came, the lightning strikes were thick and fast.
You'd see lightning flashes around. The spectacular ones are the ones that hit the nose boom. Because you'd see this big arc of lightning, and you'd watch that baby come right down the side of the aircraft, right by the canopy where you're sitting.
Fisher's research provides important insights into combating the hazards of lightning.
We had to try and gather in-flight lightning data. We discovered that almost every single lightning strike to an aircraft in flight is triggered by the aircraft itself. The presence of the aircraft causes a lightning strike to be there that would not otherwise have occurred.
They also find that a lightning strike can discharge an electric current of up to 200,000 amps in a single second. 1 amp is sufficient to kill. This huge current can attack an aircraft's fuselage, burning a hole through it. By the late 1980s, NASA can advise aircraft manufacturers how to make aircraft lightning-proof. Fiberglass components are reinforced to withstand lightning strikes. Aircraft fuel is made less explosive. Electrical equipment is carefully shielded. Today, lightning is rarely a problem. But events will show there's another side to storms that can be equally hazardous. High winds. Toronto, Canada. It's a summer evening and Air France Flight 358 from Paris is approaching Toronto International Airport. On board the Airbus 340 are 290 passengers and 12 crew. But as the flight begins its descent, the weather deteriorates dramatically.
Toronto, Air France 358 approaching.
Unusually severe winds and heavy rain hammer the aircraft. Lightning flashes across the sky. Philippe Lacaille is returning from holiday with his family.
The pilot said, "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some weather above Toronto. We're going to have to circle for a little while." So we just reopened our books and circled.
The weather continues to deteriorate, and the Toronto airport authorities declare a red alert. It means landing conditions are hazardous, and there's a risk of lightning strikes. Worse, as Flight 358 finally comes into land, there are huge gusts of wind. Visibility is poor. The pilots struggle to see where they're going. The plane is rocked from side to side.
The plane started to shake, and I can remember that my wife near me was holding onto a chair. I was holding onto my seat as well.
Finally, the aircraft touches down. There's a spontaneous outbreak of applause. But the ordeal is not over. Moments later, still traveling at nearly 200 kilometers an hour, the plane runs off the runway.
It was obvious that we were not on the tarmac. We were rocking and shaking just as if you were in a roller coaster. Everybody was screaming. I thought, oh no, this is really bad. We're not going to come out alive. My daughter is like 1 row ahead of me, and she's going to die without even holding hands with us, So the only thought I had was to try to grab her and put her on the roof so we could all die together.
The plane plows through the airport perimeter fence. And finally comes to rest in a small ravine.
And everybody was like stunned, in shock, you know? First of all, to be alive, because how can you survive this kind of event, you know? It's just miraculous. But also, what are we doing next now? What's going on?
Almost immediately, there are shouts of fire. When fire breaks out, there are only about 90 seconds to evacuate an aircraft before fire reaches the fuel tanks.
It was like a vision of hell.
It's everybody for themselves.
The smell of burning fuel. There were people walking on top of each other. It was like complete chaos.
As the last passengers scramble to exit, Flight 358 bursts into flames. There are dozens of injuries, but all 302 passengers and crew survive. Six years later, Philippe Lacaille is still living with the emotional scars.
You never forget this kind of emotional upheaval. It was very hard. Short of a miracle, I can't explain how we could have escaped in 1 minute and 15 seconds through 2 gates, 2 doors, 309 passengers.
The episode is dubbed the Toronto Miracle. As air crash investigators now arrive at the scene, they face one basic question. Why did a plane equipped with the most modern navigation aids shoot off the runway? Was it a question of pilot error, mechanical failure, or extreme weather, or even a combination of them all? They take data from the aircraft's charred and scorched black boxes. Réal Lavasseur is the chief crash investigator.
So we looked at the brakes, we looked at the tires, we looked at the engines, we looked at all the systems, the hydraulics and all the other systems, the electrical, whatnot, and there was absolutely nothing wrong with that aircraft.
The investigators can rule out mechanical failure. But when they analyze Flight 358's last moments, they uncover what appear to be a number of pilot errors. The crew had brought the aircraft into land far too fast and had hit the runway far too far along.
I don't think they had a clear realization at that point as to how much runway they were leaving behind before they landed the aircraft. And consequently, the aircraft lands quite long, about halfway down the runway.
As the end of the runway appears, the plane is still going too quickly.
It was still doing over 120 miles an hour, so that's a lot of speed.
But is it simply a matter of pilot error? As investigators look further, they find a more complicated story. The pilots may have also been victims of exceptional weather. They may have run into a dangerous phenomenon known as wind shear. Wind shear is a serious threat to aircraft. It occurs in the 2 or 3 minutes before a storm breaks, when there can be rapid shifts in wind direction.
You can see a thunderstorm approaching. Big cloud, getting dark, and what happens to the wind? It goes calm, and then all of a sudden, it starts whipping around, and then it comes at you from all directions.
This alarming phenomenon is caused by a cold front hitting warmer air.
It can come straight at you, or sideways, or behind you, and then it'll change. And this makes an aeroplane very difficult to fly, especially just after takeoff and just before landing, when it's going very slowly and the aircraft is close to the ground.
In their worst form, these winds are like mini tornadoes in reverse. Highly concentrated coils of wind that, instead of spiraling upwards, spiral downwards. They are known as microbursts or downdrafts. They're considered so potentially lethal that during the 1990s, NASA spends millions of pounds investigating them. Paul Robinson worked on the NASA wind shear program.
Microbursts form underneath large thunderstorm cells that can extend up to 50, 60,000 feet. Aircraft flying through that will experience very strong horizontal wind variations.
NASA scientists discover how microbursts can cause a pilot to make errors. A column of cold air sweeps down from the cloud base, accelerating as it goes. As it hits the ground, it spreads out horizontally. Then it curls upwards like a series of waves. An aircraft flying near this will experience a wind that starts as a headwind and then turns round and becomes a powerful tailwind.
When aircraft are slow and low and trying to control their speed as well as they can, the combination of the two in a microburst can be very hazardous.
These downdrafts are absolutely vicious things. They can change the speed at which the aircraft is going through the air, but if you go through the center of them, they actually have a very fast descending column of air which can just throw you at the ground.
Wind shear, or microbursts, are believed to be responsible for a number of disasters. 1982, Pan Am Flight 759 crashes in New Orleans. 153 people are killed. Likely cause, microburst. 1985, Delta Airlines Flight 191 crashes at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. 134 people die. Cause, microburst. More recent accidents linked to severe wind shear include a US air flight that crashed in 1994 and a Goodyear airship that crashed in 2005. So is it possible Air France Flight 358 is also a victim of some form of wind shear? Experts differ on the details, but they've pieced together what probably happened. As the aircraft comes into land, it runs into powerful headwinds. Visibility is appalling, and the pilots battle to see the runway. Then the wind whips round to a tailwind, and the plane picks up speed. As a result, it's carried too far along the runway and lands much too fast. The pilots have been caught out by the rapidly shifting winds typical of wind shear.
The investigation concluded that this crew landed an aircraft in very much reduced visibility in conditions where a crosswind was beyond the limits of the aircraft.
Extreme weather has claimed another victim. Yet there is a technology that can give pilots advanced warning of dangerous winds. It's called Doppler radar. It's an old technology, but since the 1990s, computerization has enabled it to generate simple, easy-to-read weather maps that highlight hazardous events. In this picture, the green shows heavy cloud. The red is areas of extremely heavy rain, and the purple shows thunderstorms and wind turbulence. It can't help a pilot avoid wind shear in the final moments before landing. But it can provide ample warning of weather patterns associated with severe wind in most other situations. Today, the weather should no longer be a problem for pilots. Modern aircraft are equipped to deal with snow, lightning, and big winds. But then in 2010, there's a disaster which shows that when the weather gets extreme, accidents will still happen, however good the technology. Spring 2010, and a high-powered delegation of Polish dignitaries takes off for Russia. It includes Lech Kaczynski, Poland's hugely popular president. They're on their way to remember a massacre near the Russian village of Katyn that has caused hostility between Poland and Russia since the Second World War. The hope is that this important commemoration may finally bring reconciliation. But as the Polish aircraft nears the Russian city of Smolensk, it's enveloped in fog. Landing is going to be difficult.
Good morning, Smolensk. This is a Polish military 101, estimating in 5 minutes.
Tomasz Hipki is a member of the Polish National Aviation Council and a journalist.
There were places where fog was touching the ground. In other places, cloud base was way below 100 meters, and the visibility on runway was just 200 meters. So, weather conditions were much too bad for landing.
Air traffic control counsels against even attempting to land. Worse still, the airport is not equipped with low visibility lighting to guide planes in.
Smolensk North Airport is a former military airbase with very inadequate infrastructure.
But the pilot continues to attempt to land. He makes one, then a second attempt to bring the aircraft down. Each time he's forced to pull up. Finally, he makes a third attempt. The plane comes in low. The pilots can't see the runway, but continue on down.
Too low, terrain.
In their zeal to see the runway lights through the mist, they went straight through their decision height, below which, if you don't have sight of the runway lights, you should go round again.
Suddenly, the aircraft clips a tree. It spins out of control, turns upside down, and smashes into the ground. The wreckage is scattered around, nearly 200 meters short of the runway. All 96 people on board die. They include not just President Lech Kaczynski, but senior members of Poland's parliament and armed forces, as well as religious leaders. Poland is thrown into turmoil.
The most important people in Poland died, so I don't know how will the future of our country look like.
The country declares a period of national mourning.
This is a tragedy, I think, for the country. It's never happened something like this anywhere in Europe. So it's extremely sad story for us.
A full crash investigation begins immediately. It's a joint Russian-Polish operation. Investigators soon find there are no signs of mechanical failure. The 20-year-old plane has recently been extensively overhauled. But that leaves a puzzle. The overhaul has included fitting the Tupolev Tu-154 with a sophisticated terrain avoidance system, which warns a pilot if he's too low or in danger of hitting something.
Caution, terrain. Caution, terrain. Pull up.
The inquiry hasn't been completed, but leaked transcripts from the cockpit voice recorder show that as the plane comes in, the system issues several warnings. But the pilots ignore them. Why have they done something so obviously dangerous?
Rozbijemy się!
The transcripts give a clue. As the plane approached Smolensk, the pilot can be heard reporting to a superior officer in the cockpit.
Sir, the fog is increasing. We're not gonna manage to land.
Who is he talking to? An anonymous voice replies.
Well, then we have problem.
Through the radio static, there's also the snatch of another voice adding pressure.
Will be annoyed.
The snatches of dialogue suggest the pilots were now under huge pressure. Should they risk a difficult landing, or should they abort a mission that carries international importance?
Pilots who are flying VIP flights are under a particular kind of pressure. So they really did want to do their duty, these pilots, and get all of those important people in. So they were told by air traffic control what the visibility was. It was nothing like good enough to make a safe landing. But they said, we'll go and have a look at it anyway.
Moreover, the crew are military pilots accustomed to taking orders and risks.
Warto pamiętać, że piloci generalnie są szkoleni.
Military pilots are trained to take more risks than civilian pilots. The crew in this case had come more or less straight from military school. The idea of risk-taking was firmly ingrained in them.
Mieli to jeszcze w genach, mieli to jeszcze wdrukowane.
We may never know if this is what happened. Important sections of the leaked transcripts have been deliberately deleted.
Ten stenogram, który został ujawniony, nie jest kompletny.
Some people believe Russians deliberately left gaps in transcript because what they found was damaging to Polish interests. What is certain is that if these holes are not filled, this riddle will never be solved.
But the transcripts that are available have led some experts to blame the pilots for abdicating their responsibility.
It doesn't matter if the president of Poland is on board. The person who is in charge of the aircraft is the captain of the aircraft. He is more senior in that environment than the president is. In the end, you're a trained professional. You're the one who carries the can for anything that goes wrong.
According to this version of events, the pilots had simply forgotten that when the weather gets bad, there is no substitute for their own skill and judgment. In Poland today, the hope is that lessons will be learnt and there will never be a similar accident again. Today, we have the technology to handle the weather. Pilots are better trained. Aircraft are better equipped for all weather conditions. There should be no more accidents because of the weather. But extreme weather will continue to challenge a pilot's skill and his ability to fly in the face of the unexpected.